Okay, so now we're going to start to get into Redux, and I just want to say that if you've never used Redux before, you might be really confused at first, but as we go through the course, you're going to see that it gets pretty repetitive, and it's going to start to just drill into your brain how it works. The whole flow of creating a constant, creating a reducer, an action, and then bringing that into your components. So let's head over to VS Code. Let's close this stuff up, and I want to add a reducer. So in my source folder in the front end, I'm going to create a folder called reducers, and basically each resource of our application will have a reducer file such as products. So we're going to create a product reducers. It's going to be plural because I'm going to have a bunch of different reducer functions in here, but they're all going to be related to products. So the first one I want is a product list reducer, and this is going to handle the state for the product list, which we see on the home page. So we want to create a function, and we're going to export it. So export const, and we'll call this product reducer, and this is going to be an arrow function. Now, a reducer takes in two things. It takes in the initial state, and we can set that to an empty object, and then it also takes in an action. Now when we create an action, we're going to dispatch, or we create an action reducer, we're going to dispatch an action to this reducer, and this will be an object that has a type. So the type we're going to evaluate down here and do a certain thing depending on what the type is. It might also contain a payload, so if we're getting data such as we are here, because this should be product list, we're getting our products, so it'll have a payload with those products in it that we fetch from the server. Now in the initial state here, I'm just going to add in products and set that to an empty array. Okay, so right now the initial state for products is just an empty array. Now we want, like I said, we want to evaluate the type that's in the action object, so we use a switch for that. So inside switch, let's say action dot type, and there's going to be three different types that we look for here. One is the product list request, where it's when we actually make the fetch request. One is going to be the product list success, which is if we get a successful response and we get the data. One is going to be if it fails, and then we send an error through the state. So let's put the first case, which is going to be product underscore list underscore request. And for this, in all of our cases, we just want to return this part of the state. So we want to go ahead and return, and we're going to set a loading value to true, because when we make the request, we want the component to know that it's currently fetching, so it's currently loading. So that's going to be set to true. Now when we get the response back, so let's make a case for a successful response. So product underscore success product list success. And actually up here, we can also just return products, which will just be an empty array because it hasn't been fulfilled yet. Then here, we're going to return an object, and we want to make sure we set loading to false because it's done loading, it's done making the request. And then products will be filled with that action object. There'll be a payload attached to it. So we're going to fill products in the state with that payload. And when we create the action function, this will make more sense. And then the last case we want here is if it fails. So if we try to fetch data and we get an error like a 404 or something like that, so this will be product list fail. And if that happens, then let's return. We still want to set loading to false because it's done loading. There's just going to be an error. So I'm going to set an error in the state, and we'll send that error in the payload. Okay, so up here, if it's successful, we'll send the data in the payload. Here, we'll send the error in the payload. And then we always want to just have a default here, and the default is just going to be the state. So we'll just return state, which is this right here, just the initial state. All right, so that's our reducer for product list. Now, in order to use this reducer, we have to actually add it to our store. So let's go to store.js, and we want to bring this in. So let's say import, from, and let's see, we want to go into reducers and then product reducers, and we're going to bring in product list reducer. And then in this combine reducers, we want to put, let's say, product list, and set that to our product list reducer. Now this is really important because this is what's going to show in as this piece of state. So it'll be the product list part of the state. All right, so I'm going to save that. And if I go to my Redux DevTools and I click on state, we should see product list. And right now it's just an empty array because that's what we set it to initially. All right, now as far as the action go, actually before we get into actions, I want to talk about constants. So right now our cases are these strings, and you can keep it like that. Some people don't use constants, but typically you'll put these strings inside of a variable, which is a constant, so the constant doesn't change, and it'll be the same as what this string is. So let's create a new folder in source called constants. And it just gives you a central place for all of your, all of your cases, all of your constants. So I'm going to create a file in here called product constants.js. And the way that we do this is just export const, and let's grab this. And of course we don't want quotes for the variable name, but we're going to set that to that string. And then we're going to do the same for success, and this will be success, and then fail, and this will be fail. Okay, so we'll save that. Now we want to bring those into our reducer here. So let's say import from, and we want to go // into constants, and then product constants, and we want to bring these in. So we have product list request, product list success, and product list fail. So we'll bring those in and then just take these quotes away because we're now using these constants instead of the string directly. All right, and that'll still do the same exact thing. If we look in our state, we still have the same thing here. Now let's create our action. So I'm going to, in my source folder here on the front end, we'll create a folder called actions. And let's create a new product, say product actions.js. So any actions that have to do with our product will go in here. And you're going to see a pattern of how we do things. We create the constant, the reducer, the action, and then we fire it off in the component. Now we want to bring in these constants into our action file as well. So let's import, and I'll just do from. Could have just copied this from the reducer, but whatever. We'll say product list request, product list success, and product list fail. So we'll bring those in, and then we're going to export const, and I'm going to call this list products. So what this action is going to do is pretty much what we did in our useEffect in the home screen component, if you remember. So we fetched from /API products, and we got that data back, and then we just map through them down here. Well, instead of fetching them directly here, we're going to do it through this action, and we're going to dispatch actions to the reducer. Okay, and you can think of these as action creators, these functions, and the actual actions like this that we dispatch back to the reducer, like product list request, you can think of those as actions. So action reducers are functions, these are the actual actions. Now in here, we want to make an asynchronous request, so this is where Redux Thunk comes in. What Redux Thunk allows us to do is basically add a function within a function So here after the arrow, I'm going to say async, and then a set of parentheses and another arrow. And in here, we can pass in dispatch, and that's how we dispatch these actions, list request, success, and so on. We use this dispatch. So I'm going to add a try catch here. And inside the try, let's go ahead and first dispatch the request, because we're getting ready to send a request. So here we'll pass in an object with a type, and that type is going to be product list request. So what it'll do is call in the reducer this right here, and it will set loading to true. Products will still be empty because it hasn't been fulfilled yet. All right, and then after that, this is where we want to make our request. So we're going to say const, we're going to destructure data, and we want to await, and we're going to use Axios here. So let's import that up at the top. So we'll just say import Axios from Axios. Okay, and we want to await Axios.get. So we're going to make a get request to /API/products, and that should give us the data. Now what we want to do is dispatch the product list success. So in here, it's going to be an object with a type of product list success, because if it fails, then it'll fire off down here. But if this works out and we get our successful response, then we're going to dispatch this, and we want to send as the payload, we want to send the data, because if you remember in our reducer, when it's successful, products is going to get filled with that payload, and then that should get passed down into the state. Now if something goes wrong, then we want to dispatch an object with the type of product list fail, and then the payload is going to be the error. Now here we want to try to get whatever the error message is. Like if we get right here this message, we want that to get put into the payload. All right, that way we can get our back-end errors and have them in our front-end state. So the way we do that is this, when we have this catch, this error right here, we're going to check for error.response. So that'll be like just a generic message. But if we have a custom message, we also want to check. So we'll say and check for error.response.data.message. Okay, so that's going to give us, this message right here. So if that exists, we're going to use a ternary here. So if that exists, then we want to use that error.response.data.message. Else then we'll fill this with error.message, which will just be like a generic. So this payload is going to be very, very common for all of our requests, because we just want to fill it with the error message. All right, so that creates the list products action. Now this doesn't fire off yet. You can see over here, if I reload, we would see it fire off the request and the success and all that. So what we need to do is in our component, in our home screen, we want to fire this action off. So that's what we're going to do in the next video.